If there is anyone out there who still doubts that America is a place where all things are possible, who still wonders if the dream of our founders is alive in our time, who still questions the power of our democracy, tonight is your answer.
Yes.
That, of course, is Barack Obama in 2008 after becoming the first Black American elected president of these United States. And Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and author Wesley Lowery argues that that moment, the moment you just saw, helped ignite a cycle, yes, of racial progress, but met by racial backlash, what he calls a whitelash. In fact, it's the title of his new book, American Whitelash, A Changing Nation and the Cost of Progress. Lowery was a correspondent for The Washington Post and also for our own 60 Minutes Plus, and he joins us now. Wesley, thank you very much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me, guys.
Congratulations on the book. I think you should begin by laying out, defining for us, if you could, what a whitelash is.
Of course. Well, you know, in our country, our history is in a lot of ways a tug of war between two diametrically opposed forces. Forces of white supremacy, and I don't mean that colloquially, I mean the actual literal idea of a racial caste system, and anti-racist forces, people who have fought for a more just, equitable society, the abolitionists, the civil rights movement. And so what we see in that tug of war is that in moments of racial advancement, of racial progress, it's not inevitable that they've now won the grapple, that the other side of the rope always tugs back and pulls back. And so when we think back to 2007, 2008, right, we see this ascension of an unlikely Black man with a funny name to the presidency of the United States of America. This comes at a time when immigration is fundamentally changing the demographics of our country. And what that meant was that for as many people were as excited for this victory, there were many people out there for whom this stoked an anxiety, a frustration, a fear, and we've seen the pullback in the
Yeah, you called it, you said a white supremacist force was being unleashed that very night. And that research has come to show that while many people believe, yes, there's some anti-Black bias, but there are also people that believe that a lot of white people felt that they were discriminated against too, which I thought was a very interesting premise.
The polling showed that Americans were divided by how much progress the election of a Black president represented, that actually white Americans believed it presented more progress than Black Americans did.
Yes.
And by the end of the Obama administration, a majority of white Americans believed they were racially discriminated against. Why does this matter? Because it starts to explain why we have the success of a movement like the movement that elects the former president Donald Trump. It helps explain why politicians use things like the appeal yesterday from Ron DeSantis to ban birthright citizenship, for example. These plays to kind of a nativist feeling of the country is changing, things are different, a reactionary movement that's very powerful, but as I lay out, is not just about political rhetoric, that has real life consequences for real people.
No, Wesley, you say some leaders allow this fear to be weaponized, knowing that it can result in tragedy, and that we have to speak up and acknowledge that this is happening.
That what we see time and time again in this era is actual violence, and that's violence against Jewish people, Muslims, Black people, immigrants, and that violence, we think about it through our political lens very often, but we have to think about it through that human lens, that when we demonize groups of people, whomever those people are, immigrants, refugees, Black Americans, talk about crime, about gender and sexuality, that people out there really do get scared, and that for those of us from those minority groups, it could cost us our life.
Yeah. You do write about the alienation that white Americans feel, that they feel that they're being discriminated against, and at the same token, they also will point to people like Barack Obama or even Senator Tim Scott, a Black Republican, and say, I reject the notion that this is a racist society because we've had a Black president, because we have a Black Republican running for the presidency.
Of course, and what's interesting is that there have always been the ability to try to use, whether it be individual cases or individual folks, to deflect these bigger societal criticisms, or people who will say, well, I don't feel this experience, I don't feel particularly privileged, I don't feel particularly in a better position than other people. That what we have to remember is that when we talk about race, when we talk about whiteness, we're not talking about biology. right? We know there's no biological race, so we're all humans around the table.
Right.
That we're talking about a social construct, and that whiteness in an American sense is not even just about skin color, right? But it's about this idea and this concept of who is truly American in this idea. And then when we see these political appeals to let's go back to how things used to be in the good old days and
We saw that from Nikki Haley.
make America great again, or America first, right? That appeals to people's sense of this country changing and it shifting and it being different, and that perhaps they'll end up being the losers of history.
So we break this cycle how, Wesley?
Well, I think, if I really knew the answer, I wouldn't be here. I would be out making millions of dollars and fixing society, right? But I do think a huge part of it is that
You have some thoughts.
I do have some thoughts.
You have some thoughts.
I think we have to be willing to look things in the eye and call them what they are, right? Because when we accept that this type of political rhetoric has real-life consequences, it demands of us to treat it more responsibly, to call out people who do it, not to play silly games or what is this an appeal to or we don't know or how is it. I think that so often in the Trump years, our institutions needed to be bolder and clearer about defending
Our journalistic institutions you're talking about.
all of our liberal institutions.
So much more we could say. We got to leave it there. Wesley Lowery, thank you very much. The book is American Whitelash. It is on sale right now.